Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Alva webinar. We'll be starting in about 60 seconds time. Just give the last delegates a chance to join. Sit tight. So let's start now. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Alva webinar. Here we've got Steve presenting some research that Alva commissioned. I'm Andy from Gateway. I'm just going to run through a couple of housekeeping things before I hand over to the people who you're really hearing. So on the webinar, it's going to be about a 45-minute presentation. There'll be questions and answers at the end of the session. All of the attendees to the webinar are on mute intentionally. There's about 300 people connected at the moment. You can imagine what it would be like if we had everybody trying to talk at the same time. On your screen, over to the right-hand side, you should see the Q&A box, number 1. And to ask a question of any of the panelists, follow the boxes down, number 2, 3, and 4. The webinar is being recorded, and the recordings will be distributed as part of Bernard's daily updates. And that's it from me. And you over to Bernard.
Great. Thank you very much, Andy. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. This is the latest in Alva's webinars. This morning, we're looking at a piece of research that we commissioned from Steve Mills at Decision House, an independent consultancy. And it's looking at what visitors expect when they arrive back at visitor attractions, the kind of reassurance measures and indeed reassurance narrative that they would require in order to feel confident and comfortable about going back to visitor attractions, but also the kind of things that might deter them, that would make them hesitant or cautious about going back to visitor attractions once lockdown measures have been lifted. Just to put today's webinar in context, over the course of the last 3 weeks, we've been having weekly webinars which have looked principally at recovery and reopening strategies and helping our members to think about what needs to be put in place in order that they can open safely, securely, and responsibly. And one of the things that's come back very, very clearly, not just from Alva members and attractions, but also from partners elsewhere in the tourism sector and indeed government departments, is something that someone raised at a meeting that I participated in on Saturday. It was a virtual forum which was chaired by the Secretary of State for BEIS, that's Business, Education and the Industry Strategy in Whitehall. And it was a group of about 20 of us called the Leisure and Wellness Forum. It was the first time that we'd met. We're going to be meeting fairly frequently from now on. And one of the things that a colleague from the Health and Safety Executive said really usefully was that when people go back to tourism businesses, whether they're restaurants, hotels, pubs or attractions, not only do they want to be safe, they want to feel safe too. So that reassurance message and all the measures that you can put in place in order to gain and encourage trust are absolutely crucial. So 2 weeks ago, we commissioned Steve Mills of Decision House to do a piece of primary research for us. He'll go on to talk about how that was done, the questions that were asked, and some of the key messages. Just a couple of things for you before we begin. One is that the entire presentation will be emailed out to you in about 45 minutes, 50 minutes. So don't think that you have to take massive amounts of notes now. They'll all be sent out to you. Secondly, as Andy was saying, our partner from Gateway Ticketing, this is also being recorded as well. So those of you who get the daily Alva bulletin, the recording link will be in either tonight's or tomorrow's bulletin too, so you can share that with colleagues. And the third is that this is the first of a series of waves of pieces of research whereby we understand the changing sentiment of people as the changing nature of the pandemic occurs. So this is just but one of a series of things that will help you to plan effectively for reopening strategies at your own attraction site. I'm going to be stepping back now, handing back to Steve to introduce his research, and then coming back later on to take some of the questions that you've been posing and to ask some myself too. And we're looking at about 45, 50 minutes. If it goes on to 11 o'clock, the full hour, then I think it's time well spent. So with no further ado, over to Steve.
Thank you, Bernard. Morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Good. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. So as Bernard said, this is the first wave of public sentiment research that we plan to rerun each time we feel that something happens in the marketplace that might actively change that sentiment. And I'll come back and talk a little bit more at the end about when the most appropriate times that might be. So we're not actually committing to specific times at the moment. So as Bernard said, I approached him about sort of 3 weeks ago saying, I think it'll be quite useful to get some practical insights that help your members to understand how to build trust and confidence among the attractions visiting public. And it's a couple of things really. It's about helping us to get back on our feet quickly, but then just as importantly, and if not more importantly, helping us to sustain our recovery over a period of time. So absolutely what we don't want to do is to come back, get it wrong and ruin our reputation either as individual attractions or as a sector as a whole. And that becomes very clear as we go through this piece of work. So what I want to try to do is try to answer two major practical questions that attractions are likely to have ahead of reopening. So it's number one, how should we physically present ourselves on reopening in order to build that public trust and confidence in visiting? So what should we be physically offering? What should be open? What should maybe not be open? And what measures do we need to have in place to build that trust and confidence? But again, just as importantly, it's about what communications messages we should put out there to build that confidence and also to capture the public mood of the time. So that's the challenge. How are we generating insights to meet that challenge? Very briefly, as Bernard said again, we're going to be doing periodic waves of online research among representative samples of the attractions visiting public. And by that we mean UK adults who visited at least one attraction in the UK in 2019. By attraction, we try to be as broad as possible. There's an exact definition in the questionnaire that's in the back of the deck that you'll be getting shortly. So it's a really broad definition of an attraction. So the first wave was done last week. So between Monday and Friday, results were available on Monday. So the past couple of days have been pretty intense, to be honest, putting this together. So in this first wave, there's been between 650 and 700 responses. So that's what we're aiming for. So 668 this week. And as I said, public attitudes are likely to evolve. So we intend to run this periodically as reopening nears. And also, I think, importantly, to keep running it actually in the period immediately after visiting, as people are getting used to the new environment, and because that's frankly the critical time when things are either going to go well or badly. So an important time to measure then. So let's kick off with looking at how the public is currently feeling about visiting attractions. I wanted to kick off with some positive news, and there is actually quite a bit of positive news in this presentation. So I've picked this actually not from the work that we're doing, but from the BVA BDRC COVID tracker. And that really indicates perhaps a growing anticipation of visiting attractions within the next 3 to 6 months. So if we have a look at this chart here, which is looking at planning on when they next anticipate going on a day out to visit an attraction, everything in the orange shading and below is within the next 3 to 6 months. So you can see as time's going on, that is actually growing, and in particular in the last week. I think what's potentially happening there is perhaps it's a reaction to the horizons for overseas travel perhaps becoming a little bit further away. I think it's dawning on people that perhaps their summer holiday this year may not happen. So their horizons are becoming a little bit closer to home, and that's potentially of benefit to visitor attractions, which are clearly nearer to home. And we're seeing propensity to go on domestic holidays staying about the same at the moment. So it's kind of going down for overseas travel, staying the same for domestic, and going up for visitor attractions, which are potentially the most local things that people can do. So I think potentially it could be quite positive. I picked out a comment on the right-hand side from the recovery tracker that we're doing, which summarizes it quite well, I think. So I hope to visit a lot more places when we come out of lockdown. I'm not too keen on going abroad yet, but I'd be keen to see more places around the UK. I'd still keep my distance, but if I felt it was safe, I'd go for it. So potentially this summer, there is going to be a market around in the UK which would ordinarily not be here. Quite similar to what we saw back in 2008 when we had the last staycation phenomenon. Clearly, again, this is very likely to happen again this year. So that's the positive news. So this is the first chart that we're going to look at from our own recovery tracker. And I think the first point is the market is highly cautious overall at the moment. So one of the questions we asked was, for each type of attraction they would ordinarily visit, how soon do you think it will be before you visit each of these types of attraction after they reopen? So we asked people to say, well, I'll go back as soon as the opportunity arises. I'll wait and see what happens for a short while, or actually I'm unlikely to want to visit for a long time. So for each of those attractions that they ordinarily go to, that's the question we asked. And as you can see from that, it's the middle section that probably stands out. So in that light green area, most people are in that section, which is, I'm going to wait and see what happens for a short while. And that really emphasizes how important it is to get it right in that period, in the days and the short number of weeks after we reopen again. So over 50% of people are kind of sitting on the fence at the moment. On the left-hand side, you've got those who are more confident about going back as soon as the opportunity arises. And on the right-hand side, again, those who are actually feeling they're unlikely to want to visit for a long time. And kind of wind up a little bit worryingly for me, that's a big chunk and more for some sections, for some sectors than others. But I think the other point to pull out here, and some of you will obviously be there already, is looking at the variation between those different types of attractions. I don't think it's actually as simple as outdoors versus indoors. I've seen quite a lot around at the moment saying, actually, if it's outdoors, it's fine. If it's indoors, it's not. Clearly, the two that jump out the top there are country parks and nature reserves and gardens. They have the highest proportion who are more likely to see people returning as soon as the opportunity arises. But there are also some outdoor attractions further down the list. So zoos and safari parks, farm attractions, and in particular theme parks down the bottom that are perhaps people are more reticent about visiting straight away. In particular, theme parks down the bottom there, you've got only 12% saying I'll go back as soon as the opportunity arises, and a big 42% saying I'm unlikely to want to visit for a long time. So it's not just about outdoors versus indoors. What it is about, the key driver really, it's less about outdoor versus indoors, and it's more about perceptions of whether that type of attraction can manage crowds and social distancing. Now, clearly, outdoor versus indoor is a key part of that, but I think this is absolutely the main driver. It's about, can you manage the perceptions of crowds and maintain that social distancing? So the reason why I say that is we asked the first question we asked people in this piece of work is, tell us in your own words how you currently feel about visiting attractions once they reopen to the public. What are your hopes? What are your worries or anxieties? And it was overwhelmingly about this topic, about fear of crowds, overcrowding, too many visitors, too busy. So 18% of people spontaneously mentioned something to do with that. So things like, I'll be wary of how they will manage the large crowds and what restrictions have been put in place. I'll take into account their health and safety plans. The one on the top right gave me a bit of a wry smile. It will be difficult with hordes of foreign tourists flooding through the doors, and so I'll probably leave visiting this year. I can hear all those major attractions in London thinking, if only we were going to get those hordes of foreign tourists this year. But but nevertheless, the sentiment is there. And again, 12% mentioning something specifically about concern over social distancing. So again, the top comment there, I would need to be 100% sure that I could maintain social distancing and that they would not be crowded. And if visitors don't follow social distancing, that staff would do something about it. Now, I think that introduces something that is really important. And that's, it's, as Bernard was saying at the start, it's not just about doing the right thing, but it's about being seen to do the right thing. So it's not just having the rules in place, it's making sure that we police those rules, staff police those rules, and you are seen to be policing those rules. There's obviously loads on social media at the moment about how supermarkets are beginning to fall away in terms of being able to do that effectively. There's lots of moaning about, I'm going to the supermarket, there's all these measures in place, but the staff aren't policing them properly. So I think that's the main thing that we've got to try to focus on when we reopen again. And then there are some comments down the bottom there about I'll only go to quiet, less busy places like gardens and country parks. And I will read that top one there because I think it really captures the mood at the moment. So I'd really like outdoor attractions to open again. I think this would support mental well-being and the local economy. I think there are ways to do this safely by improving hand washing facilities, limiting numbers, perhaps pre-booking only, regular cleaning, etc. And it's the bottom part that I think really captures the mood at the moment. So I think attractions that cannot open safely, for example, theme parks, should remain shut for the foreseeable future, but I see no reason not to open attractions with gardens at the same time as shops. So I think that really sums up where people are at the moment. So that's the key driver. I want to have a look now at those people on the left-hand side of that previous chart. So those who are, sorry, in the middle of that chart. So that cautious 50% in the middle who are saying, I'm going to wait and see. So many potential visitors are adopting that approach at the moment. And I think that's really just driven by the worry that over-opening too soon. So lots of people talking about, I'm worried about opening too early, the virus will come back, I'm unsure how safe it's going to be when we do come back. So comment down the bottom left there, I hope that extra precautions are taken by the attraction owners to make them a safe place to visit while this coronavirus outbreak is still here. My worry is that people will catch coronavirus by being too close to each other. Again, I think that summarizes it quite well. So, and again, this really emphasizes how important it is to get it right. People are sat there waiting to see what's happening in the first days and weeks. And that's going to be the crucial period to building trust and confidence. So it's not just about physically opening up, it's about making sure we keep our reputation intact in that initial period. So what about the people on the right-hand side? So we've seen that there is perhaps a worryingly large number of people in that red section on the right-hand side of that initial chart saying, I won't be coming back for a long time, perhaps a fifth to a quarter of the market. And I've drawn on the BDRC tracker again here as useful context, which was looking at what stage people feel that they will be comfortable going to various activities again. And about halfway down that list, you'll see going on a day out to a visitor attraction. And on the right-hand side there, you've got, again, a similar sort of a fifth to a quarter of the markets saying, you know what, I'm not going to be going back until at least there's a proven hospital treatment for COVID-19 symptoms, or everything down to actually until I've been vaccinated myself. So a similar sort of people. So I think you've got, at the moment at least, a fifth to a quarter of people saying, you know what, I'm not going out there until I'm absolutely convinced that there's a vaccine, or at least the virus has been comprehensively beaten. And again, in the work that we've done, there's quite a few spontaneous comments that people have made about, I'm not going out until there's a vaccine or no deaths or we've beaten the virus. So, I'll wait until I'm absolutely sure that the threat's completely gone. I'm not prepared to risk myself in any way at all at this time. So I thought it'd also be useful to look at, are there any groups who are more likely to come back quickly and any groups that are more likely to be in this more worrying right-hand side group. So in the research that we've done, we've had a look at firstly on that left-hand side. So there are some groups who are more likely to return as soon as that opportunity arises. So there are actually, it's about 40% of the market who will visit at least one attraction type as soon as the opportunity arises after reopening. So they might not be comfortable with all of them, but there's at least one, perhaps, you know, the country parks or the gardens, that they are comfortable going back to quickly. So who are that group? Well, I think the driver of that, really, as you'd expect, are those who are more frequent attraction visitors. So those who are already more comfortable within that visitor attraction environment, perhaps. And again, perhaps they will be your most loyal and your existing visitors, you know, rather unsurprisingly. So that's what's driving it at the moment. The next one is interesting. So it's actually higher among those who are older. So slightly higher among those who are age 55 or over. So I think it's a fallacy at the moment to assume that older people will be slower to return. It might be taken out of our hands, potentially. It may be that those in the more vulnerable, perhaps older age groups, actually won't be able to or allowed to come to visit attractions for longer, but the sentiment is there, and the keenness among that older age group is there at the moment. They are among the most keen to come back. But as we'll see later on, although they are the keenest to come back, they're also a group that perhaps needs the most reassurance in some of the measures that are in place before they will commit to coming back. And then the other group that's higher are those from the lower socioeconomic groups, so the C2DEs. They're most confident. They're the most likely, perhaps, to think that if someone says it's safe, then it's safe for me to come back. So they're the groups who are most likely to come back quickest. On the other side of the fence, who are likely to be the slowest coming back? So who are most likely to be in that group who perhaps feel that they're unlikely to want to visit for a long time? And again, over half feel that there's at least one attraction type that they're unlikely to want to visit for a long time after reopening. Again, some of them might be some of these people will be comfortable with others, but these are the people who are worried about at least one. So yeah, on the opposite side of the fence, it's those who are less frequent attraction visitors who are going to be less likely to come back straight away, or most likely to take the longest time off. It's actually, the opposite of the olders. So it's those younger age groups that are perhaps more anxious about coming back. Interestingly, and Londoners, it's particularly difficult for Londoners, and I think there's probably several reasons for that. Now, clearly, Londoners have been perhaps one of the areas that are hardest hit by virus deaths anyway, so the fear factor is perhaps larger there. London clearly has a younger age profile anyway, so feeding into what we've just seen about those younger that are less likely to want to come back. And frankly, I think in London, there are less outdoor options. There are more indoor options and more they perceive to be busier sites. So it comes back to the whole principle of social distancing might be more difficult in London, or perceived to be more difficult in London among Londoners. So actually, I was saying to this to one client the other day, is actually the message for London attractions might be, this is actually a fantastic chance to experience London when it's quiet. So the message to domestic visitors, come, you might see those overseas hordes of tourists usually, but now's a great time to actually come and see it when it's quiet. Just finally in this section, I wanted to have a look at how people will feel about admission charges and donations. This really comes off the back of, there was a webinar a couple of weeks ago from Baker Richards, who talked extensively about pricing. And So I just wanted to try and clarify things in this area, or give my opinion on this area as a result of this research. Now, again, I pulled on the BVA BDRC tracker here because they asked a question which was about thinking ahead to when you are able to do these activities again, how much more or less normal would you pay to do them? Now, the BVA BDRC tracker suggests that the market intends to pay less than normal to visit attractions after lockdown. Now, I think that probably reflects overall spend on visiting attractions rather than any expectations around specific admission charges or donations. And I think they will pay less or spend less at the moment because naturally they're feeling that when they open, as we've seen earlier, they're going to be more cautious. So of course they're going to spend less. At all of these things on that list, some people are going to be feeling less well off anyway, so they will be spending less. So I think if it was about paying for individual occasions, I would expect more variation across some of these activities than we're getting here. So for example, I wouldn't potentially expect to pay less for a meal after I come back again. I would just perhaps expect to spend less in that category of going to a restaurant generally, therefore spend less. So I'd be a little bit careful about interpreting that as people expecting lower admission charges. So I thought I'd take a better look at that within this tracker, and at the last minute I thought we'd add in a question that tried to get a better handle really on expectations over admission charges and donations. So I think in fact there is some evidence of increased altruism in the market at the moment. Now frankly it might be aspirational, but visitors I don't think are especially expecting blanket price discounting here. So we asked the question about when attractions reopen, what's your opinion of how much you would expect to pay for or donate to the attractions you visit compared to before the coronavirus outbreak? And we asked people on a scale here between 7 and 1, where 7 is I'd expect to pay or donate more to attractions I visit as they need the financial help right now, through to I'd expect to pay for or donate less to the attractions I visit as most visitors will be worse off financially. So the figures in green there in that donut all reflect the proportions who expect to pay more, and in the darker colours, in the browny colours, the proportion that expect to pay less. So as you can see there's about 30% that expect to pay more, and only half that expect to pay less. So I think that should give us perhaps some confidence about our pricing going forward. And I think what backs that up is some of the comments that we're seeing within our tracker at the moment. So there is a recognition that attractions are going through a tough time at the moment, and there is a fear of some of them closing and a recognition that attractions are needing support at the moment. So there are some quite useful quotes in there. So I'm looking forward to going out and about to attractions when they open. I think it's important to give them my custom following reopening, or I can't wait to support these industries and national assets. So there is a real, I think, sense of altruism out there in the moment that we can act on quickly. And there's some further clues as well, I think, on pricing and donor targets. And again, coming back to the Baker Richards work, they were suggesting, try as much as you can to differentiate pricing and look at the value that you're giving to your visitors in relation to pricing to help you try and set admissions pricing when you reopen again. So I think the clues are here. So right now, members are feeling particularly altruistic right now. So you've got 42% of members of any organisation, any attractions organisation that we talk to in this piece of work, expect to pay or donate more at the moment, compared with 30% overall, as we've seen on the left-hand side there. So they're feeling particularly altruistic. Maybe a good time for a donation ask among members at the moment. Altruism is highest among young people, actually, at the moment. So the 16 to 34s, it's higher, and it's also higher among families at the moment. So 38% expect to pay or donate more at the moment. So again, perhaps some information there to help you be confident perhaps about pricing when you reopen. And a big tick for zoos here down the bottom. So zoo visitors most altruistic. So 46% of frequent zoo visitors that we spoke to expect to pay or donate more at the moment. And I think that's reflective of obviously some great work by zoos at the moment, particularly places like Chester Zoo, who've got their great online visit out there, and some great media coverage from zoos, and it's the message has really got out there that zoos need support at the moment, and that's reflected here, I think. So I think the summary of that really is that there's no particular rush to discount in my view. Obviously, if you've got information about your own attraction and its market segments, you might want to differentiate pricing based on what you know, but I don't think there's any need to rush out and do blanket discounting. So that's how the market is feeling. So if we move on to the last few slides, which are really about what are the practical measures we can take to build trust and confidence in visiting. So what should we say? What should we do? Now, of course, at the moment, the big unknown is what we will be allowed to do or what we will be compelled to do. But regardless of that, I think it's still good to know how the public feel, so that when we can talk to them about what we're allowed or perhaps compelled to do in the right way. So, for example, if we find out that staff, I don't know, might need to wear masks and the public are perhaps less comfortable about that, then we know that it's an issue that we need to address with them in advance of returning all on site. So it's still worth asking these questions. So the first thing we'll look at is the facilities that people will feel more anxious or uncomfortable about using after reopening. So I think it's fair to say that there is going to be some widespread anxiety around using particularly indoor facilities, particularly where social distancing is likely to be more problematic. So I think this is quite intuitive that people are going to feel more uncomfortable about indoors than outdoors, particularly given what we've seen earlier about the particular anxieties around social distancing and crowding. But in particular, if we look at cafes, I think there's a particular concern over cafes. So 51% saying I'm feeling more uncomfortable about using cafes, indoor cafes, after they reopen. Outdoor cafes, it's still the highest level of all the outdoor facilities down the bottom, so 30% feel uncomfortable. And actually, if we look on the right-hand side there in that box, you've got about a quarter saying, you know what, regardless of whether it's indoors or outdoors, I'm uncomfortable about using a cafe when I go back. Toilets, again, half feeling quite uncomfortable about using toilets when they go back. I had a look at whether there are any difference between men and women here, and actually it's pretty much the same. It's actually a little bit higher among females, concern over toilets. And then others you can see they're fairly lower but similar. So indoor events and outdoor events, similar levels of concerns there. Playgrounds, indoor playgrounds. I'm going to take a separate look actually in I think it's the next slide or one slightly after, that looks at just the family audience. So we can see there that playground shoots up a little bit in terms of concern among that audience. Some of the ones that are a little bit lower down, and in particular, just to point out about audio guides and headphone tools, appears low. I mean, I think to an extent that reflects that there will be a bunch of people out there who wouldn't ordinarily use audio guides or headphones. So they're not going to say they feel more anxious or uncomfortable about using them because they wouldn't use them anyway. But I think beyond that, there is this point that comes back to what we were talking about earlier, is there's perhaps less concern with the cleaning elements of facilities, because that's within the remit of staff to do that, and they trust staff to do it. So if there is a measure in place that says staff will clean audio guides or headphones, then the public are more likely to trust that than some of the social distancing measures that are potentially more outside the control of staff, because that's frankly down to the public adhering to some of these rules. So it comes back again to the point of being seen to police some of these things. And then down the bottom there, you've got this gung-ho 20% again, who are going to come back regardless, and nothing's going to stop them. They'll feel comfortable regardless. Just to have a look at that in a little bit more detail, coming back to age again. So we mentioned earlier about older people being keenest to return, and indeed they are, but I said earlier as well that they are likely to need most reassurances, and I think this demonstrates that. So anxiety does increase with age, particularly for indoor facilities. So as we can see there, as age goes up for each of these facilities, the proportion that will feel more anxious or uncomfortable goes up quite sharply. So for indoor seating among under 35s, for example, you've got 42% who feel more anxious or uncomfortable, but that's 61% among the over 55s. So they are feeling more anxious. So there definitely should be a target, if you like, for reassurance. So that's in all of those indoor facilities, higher among the older age groups. It's less the case for outdoor facilities, frankly. It's much more even between the age groups there, I think. So I think for older people, they absolutely feel more comfortable in those outdoor environments. And again, there's some comments down the bottom that illustrate that. So I hope that attractions can reopen. I would be concerned about social distancing and whether cafe areas had been properly cleaned. So I think the message from that is if you are an indoor, particularly if you're an indoor attraction with an older age profile, perhaps galleries, for example, or some galleries, you will need to work especially hard on communicating and implementing those distancing measures within those facilities that we're talking about there. I said I'd have a quick look at those with children. So this chart is based on all those that have children under 16 in their household. Actually, overall, those with children tend to be actually more anxious about outdoor and less anxious about indoor facilities compared with the attractions visiting population as a whole. They're still more concerned about indoors than outdoors, but the gap between them is closer together for families. But the only point I really wanted to make here is just to look at playgrounds in particular. So playgrounds indoors all of a sudden is obviously more of a concern for those with families. So it's pretty high. So 43% among those with families, and outdoor, there's concern among this group among outdoor playgrounds as well, so 29% down there. So we've talked about facilities. Now, what about attitudes towards distancing and cleanliness measures? So what we asked here was which of these measures would make you feel more comfortable about visiting after reopening? So we're asking there on that scale from much more comfortable through to actually, does it make you feel less comfortable? And again, that was a code that we put in late on. I'm glad we did, because it draws out some of the issues towards the bottom of the chart that we'll have a look at in a second. But at the top there, it's very clear, of course, as reflecting what we've already talked about, that distancing measures are going to be much appreciated and will make people feel more comfortable. And in particular, the distancing measures between visitors. So distancing measures in queues and around the site, you've got 39% saying that they would feel much more comfortable, and I think 82% saying it would make them feel more comfortable generally. So huge numbers there, incredibly important. And also in terms of limiting numbers of visitors on site at one time, again, hugely valued. They're slightly less worried about maximising distance between visitors and staff. I mean, that said, it's obviously still very much appreciated, and you've got almost 3/4 saying that would make them feel comfortable. So I think the couple of examples we put in there in the questionnaire were about using contactless, and if I can remember the other one off the top of my head, I can't remember what the other one was. contact. I think it was self-service cafes actually. Yeah, so they were the couple of examples that we put in there of how to maximise distance between visitors and staff. But slightly less worried about that. And I think again it comes back to the whole point about concern over visitors being able to maintain that social distance between themselves rather than between staff and visitors, because actually the staff can be more in control of that. Cleanliness, again, you know, the obvious things there really. So hand sanitizer at entrance and around the site seems to be, well, that's a given. That's a kind of order qualifier. That's what we're going to be expecting from you, of course. And to a slightly lesser extent, staff visibly cleaning surfaces. I think then to the next one down, so notices on site reassuring visitors about cleaning and other measures. It's slightly lower down, and again, I think it comes back to that point about visitors need to see it in action. We need to see it being policed. It's not just about, you know, you've put the notices up and we trust you to therefore do it. It's about seeing it in action. It's much more than just about lip service. We need to see it being policed. And then the final one is really looking at PPE, which is quite interesting. So there is a little bit more pushback on the right-hand side of that chart there. So proportions of people who feel less comfortable about PPE, in particular, if it were compulsory for visitors to wear masks. So on the right-hand side there, you've got 23% saying, actually, that would make me feel less comfortable about visiting when I go back. It is more polarizing, and I think it's fair to say, I mean, although it is, there are bigger proportions on that right-hand side, you have still got big proportions on the left-hand side saying that each of those areas would make people feel more comfortable. But I think it's just something to be a little bit wary about in communications. And we'll recognise that on the right-hand side, there is some pushback. There's also a little bit of pushback on the bottom row there, so taking temperature of all visitors on entering. But again, you know, it's still the majority of people would feel more comfortable there. We saw earlier that older people are perhaps the keenest to return, but they need more reassurance. And I think this next chart reinforces that. And again, older people do feel more likely to feel comfortable with most of the measures in place. So, sorry, it's a bit spidery, this one, but looking at distancing measures first of all, by the 3 age groups. So you've got the bright yellow line there is aged under 35 through to the grey line, aged 55 or over. And the further away from the centre of the chart you are, the more likely you are to feel comfortable or reassured by that measure. And you can see again, it tends to be that older age group that are feeling more comfortable by each of those social distancing measures. So again, perhaps a greater need for reassurance among those older age groups. And the same with cleanliness. The older age groups tend to be further out on each of those measures, with the notable exception, again, of the compulsory for visitors to wear masks. So older people are feeling the most pushback there for compulsory wearing masks. They're the most uncomfortable. So down the bottom there, you've got 29% of those aged 55 or over feel compulsory visitor masks would make them feel less comfortable, and that compares with that 23% among the market overall. I've got some illustrative quotes on cleanliness and PPE. I'm conscious of time, so I'm not going to run through these in any great detail here. Cleanliness, so one of them there, I feel optimistic, but at the same time, I will still take protective measures such as using hand sanitizer or not touching strangers. It did make me raise my eyebrows slightly about these images of people going around touching strangers, but anyway. And then PPE on the right-hand side. Again, many happy with masks, but not everyone. Into the last couple of charts. What we've got here is I started this one in yesterday. So again, the most recent BVA tracker looks at catering facilities in particular, and what conditions people would put on or feel necessary when they're now visiting catering facilities. So over 80% of those who usually use on-site catering facilities feel that there's at least one extraordinary measure that's necessary. So you can see down there, for example, staff wearing gloves and masks at all times. Card payments are all quite high. These measures do tend to focus on the cleanliness side of it. I think perhaps the one that's missing in there is perhaps revised seating arrangements. So the social distancing element, I think, is missing there. So that's maybe something we could add, or maybe BDRC could add. I know they're probably listening to this on the next wave of their tracker, to look at the relative importance of social distancing versus the cleanliness measures again. I just wanted to drop in a quick chart on that comes from some US research that's very similar, and that research tends to reinforce some of the insights we're finding here, and really emphasizes the importance of social proof. So the question they asked in that piece of work was, what would make you feel safe and comfortable going to a museum, aquarium, theatre, zoo, or concert again? So the benefit of this bit of work is it does actually compare the impacts of exhibit venues, so perhaps those that are more like visitor attractions, and performance venues, so more like theatres, for example. And there are some differences there, but we can again begin to see some of the important things coming out. Now, clearly, availability of a vaccine is going to be the most influential on making people feel more confident and comfortable again. But the social proof idea, so seeing others visit, the third one down there, extremely high. So this social proof notion. So again, reinforcing that that first period, people are going to be that 50 to 55% of people who are going to be sat there waiting to see what happens. They're going to be waiting to see others visit and have a good experience before they jump. The difference between US and UK market appears to be from this is everything seems to be about hand sanitizer there. So you've got large proportions saying about hand sanitizer, and actually the social distancing measures towards the bottom, things like avoiding long lines or limits on crowds, are actually significantly below the hand sanitizer element. So it's more about cleanliness and less about social distancing in the US at the moment, by the looks of it. And then the final chart before we try and pull it together is, I just wanted to understand how the public wanted us to behave on reopening. What characteristics should we be trying to display to the public? And I think, so what we tried to do there is we asked people to rank these 8 characteristics in order of importance. So these were characteristics that we came up with in advance. So where 1 is the most important characteristic and 8 is the least important characteristic. So the ones at the top with the lowest scores are the most important. So I think above all, as we can see here, audiences feel that attractions should focus their efforts primarily upon providing a safe environment, and that really summarizes everything that we've been talking about all the way through this. That's the most important thing, of course, but there are some added bonuses in there, and the next 3 most important are a warm welcome, of course, flexibility, particularly in bringing their own food and drink. So picnics, for example, we've seen the concern over cafes, so some flexibility in allowing visitors to bring their own food and drink, or even maybe providing picnic areas, would be strongly valued. And patience with visitors as well. There's going to be a lot of visitors turning up with concerns, and it's going to be a challenging time for staff, no doubt. So showing patience is a valuable bonus, I think. But I think at the bottom of the chart, visitors are not especially looking for financial benefits. Again, as we've seen earlier on, people are feeling quite altruistic right now. So financial generosity towards visitors and recognition for loyal visitors are at the lower levels of importance at the moment. The people are feeling altruistic. So that's pretty much it. I've got a couple of quick slides at the end that are key takeouts that hopefully I've got communicated well this morning. So first of all, so this is the key takeouts. Number 1, clearly the market is highly cautious overall at the moment, and that the market is generally waiting to see how well attractions handle that critical reopening phase before committing to visiting. Secondly, how well we deal with fears over crowds and our ability to both implement and, really importantly, police those distancing measures on site is going to determine our success. That is absolutely the key driver. And as I said, policing is key because that's where the public see the risk. That's where the public see visitors potentially letting themselves down by breaking those social distancing rules. So we need to be not afraid of actively policing those social distancing rules that perhaps supermarkets are beginning to fall down on at the moment. Therefore, all attractions need to take the time to get it right, self-evidently. I've put there, I know Bernard's been talking about potentially trying to set up some attractions kite mark. So there's some potential inputs to that here that are the most crucial elements, perhaps. So limiting number of visitors on site at once, be seen to be implementing and policing distancing measures on site. I think I may have mentioned that once or twice in this. So it's not just lip service, it's active policing, including toilets. Consider only opening cafes and play facilities where that distancing can actively be policed. Can we be more flexible on providing picnic facilities, or actively, and maybe part of that kite mark could be, we are being more flexible on picnic facilities and people bringing their own food, possibly. Clearly hand sanitizer around the site and staff visibly cleaning. But that kind of recognition that PPE is a little bit more polarizing, especially if it's compulsory for visitors. And again, moving elements of the visit experience outside where it's possible for you is, of course, undoubtedly going to help generate more visits. So outdoor catering outlets, perhaps, even tours, or perhaps even some small events outside are potentially feasible, providing that those social distancing measures are in place. And the final slide is really just looking at, just re-emphasizing really that visitor-facing staff can have a hugely positive impact on reopening. So those that can provide a warm welcome and showing patients with those visitor concerns that they're inevitably going to be getting, again, is going to be crucial in determining success. And, you know, pre-visit communications with the public, or communicating all of those things that we've been talking about, is going to be particularly vital to help support some of those on-site actions. And one of the things that occurred to me was whether we can use the trend for virtual online visits positively here, perhaps to demonstrate distancing and other measures that you've got in place on site. So there are a lot of people that are going to be looking online for reassurance before their visits. Now, is there anything we can do to demonstrate how we are doing that distancing and measures on site? And, you know, preferably it's actual footage of these measures in action that will really convince people to visit. And is there, you know, any messaging around creating perceptions, at least, of physical open spaces? And I don't think that just applies to outdoors. It can apply to indoors equally as well. So if you are a 100% indoor space, are there ways that you can at least create perceptions of physical open spaces in your venue? As I talked about, we shouldn't assume that older visitors will take longer to return. They're amongst the most keen to return, but perhaps need the most reassurance, frankly. And there is evidence of some increased altruism in the market. That could present some opportunities. So visitors are not expecting blanket price discounting. Perhaps it's a good time for donation asks. Altruism is higher, particularly among young people and families at the moment. And then the last point, very last point, I promise, sorry, I'm conscious I've gone about 5 minutes over here. But there's some positive membership opportunities. So current members, as we've seen, are feeling particularly altruistic right now. Again, is it a good time for donation asks? Potentially, it's a good time for recruitment, with the public, you know, likely to remain largely in the UK this summer. We saw back in 2008 quite a big boom in membership, where people were looking to squeeze as much as they possibly could out of their memberships during that period. And then finally, are there some additional exclusivity opportunities here or benefits? So can we use the situation to add benefits, such as, for example, priority booking, where there are some inevitably going to be limited space at some places. Could we do some perhaps member-only days with an even further visit limit to help people feel more confident about social distancing, for example? Are there, if you are perhaps a mixed indoor-outdoor attraction, perhaps we can say, actually, you have to be a member to use the indoor facilities, because we are trying to limit the numbers of people indoors, or at least prioritize your members for internally. So very quickly on next steps, I mentioned at the start that we would potentially be running this again periodically when we predict there could be a material change in sentiment. So perhaps the best times for that are perhaps when the public has a better idea about an outlined timetable for reopening. That might be a time when sentiment changes, or more likely when the public has some information about the measures that attractions will be required to have in place. That again, there might be some material change in sentiment at that point and a good chance to rerun it. And again, I think it's important to run it after reopening as the public reacts to that new visiting environment where you have some initial successes or otherwise. And we'll be incorporating any new issues as they emerge as well into the next stages. So sorry, I'm conscious again, I probably went 5 minutes or so over, but that's really it. So I will stop sharing and hand back over to Bernard.
Brilliant. Steve, thank you very much. That was incredibly detailed, very clear, really comprehensive.
I'm not sure I like incredibly detailed, but anyway.
Just to let everybody know that we've just sent round the whole of that presentation. We've emailed it around to everybody who gets our evening bulletin. So if you do get our daily bulletin, you'll have just received that whole presentation. So I hope you find it useful. Very happy to share it with colleagues. Steve, a number of questions have come up. So if you wouldn't mind, some of them are statistical in nature. So the operation of the research that you did. Yeah. First one, is there a breakdown that you've done of preference for visitor attraction by age? So if you are in that over 55 age group, do you have an understanding of which attractions they're most likely to go to?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in that first question, yes. So looking at the question about confidence in coming back, we can look at each of those different attraction types by age. Yeah, absolutely.
Second one, is it also broken down by geography? So you said that Londoners were most cautious. Does that differ according to different cities, but also outdoor or Scotland or Northern Ireland?
Yes, again, similar. You said it was detailed, but there is all that extra detail in there. So more than happy to have a dig into that again by different attraction types and geography. Yeah. So candidly, there's going to be some regions that are too small. So for example, although Northern Ireland is included in this work, we've probably only got 15 to 20 respondents for Northern Ireland. One thing we could potentially look at next wave is if there is sufficient appetite for increasing that sample size, so we can really drill down in more detail, then we can look at doing that.
Okay. I mean, my sense is from people that actually there's a real appetite now for as much detail as possible. So, if you and I talk about potentially expanding that cohort, that would be really useful. Yeah. Another question that came up was, clearly you've identified that people are cautious about spending, but is the motivation there as much about fear of recession as it is about the money that they've got in their pocket now?
I think I think inevitably. I mean, it's very difficult to answer that question right now. I mean, there is, again, back in the BDRC tracker, there is a significant proportion of the population that is feeling very impacted right now. I can't remember what the exact proportion is. I think it's around about a third, at least 30 to 40%. I think they're feeling impacted financially right now. So yeah, I think inevitably it's going to be playing a role here. I think we have to accept the fact that there are going to be obviously less people around visitor attractions. I think that the overarching point about pricing is that the question is, if we cut our prices, are we going? How is that realistically going to add very much more to the number of people that we are going to expect? And I would say in the current environment, you could slash your prices and it's not actually going to make a huge difference to the volume of people coming through, because they are so far away from wanting to come to attractions that that isn't going to be the tipping point. So you are really pricing for the people who are within the mindset of coming to attractions anyway. So that's why I'm saying, actually, I think we should not be going into that blanket price discounting. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to get about it.
That was certainly the conclusion of the webinar that we had a couple of weeks ago with Baker Richards, who was saying, you know, if you go down that route, then you start undermining your brand, you start undermining your market position, and actually for no particular monetary benefit or economic benefit. A couple of others, not so much questions, but comments really. I mean, one was, and this is something for Alva members to think about, the vast majority of front of house staff at visitor attractions are currently furloughed. But it's really clear from what you're saying that it's the front of house staff, when they come back, that will make all the difference in terms of perceptions of safety, behaving responsibly, and policing some of those things. So there's going to be a huge amount of work to do in bringing those furloughed staff back, and for the attractions to absolutely realize. I mean, it's the kind of mantra that I've been using for years about staff, not stuff. You know, people initially come to you because of what you've got, your collections, your sites, your heritage, your stories, but they'll come back because of how you made them feel. And if ever there was a case of that, it's now. The other takeout that I took from what you were saying, and it's not surprising, but you clarified it really well, is that visitors instinctively trust the behavior of attraction staff to do the right professional thing. What they don't trust and what they're anxious about is the behavior of their fellow members of the public. So that's where the intervention of attraction staff in policing and demonstrating good behavior and infection control protocols are going to be really, really important.
Yeah, and yes, and I think that will be the biggest challenge for staff, because it's in human nature, particularly for museum staff, to be nice and friendly. There's going to be a challenge here of getting the balance right between being nice and friendly and policing these things. I feel that the sentiment from this at the moment, or out there, is that people aren't going to mind being told what to do in the short term, and I think the staff should be fairly confident about trying to police this as best as they can. Of course, they're going to get the odd member of the public who are pushing back to them, and you know, they're going to get rude people. But I think in the main, for every rude person you come across, the others who are listening into that conversation will be appreciating what's going on. In my view,
that's a really good point. And something else that you brought out as well, which has been confirmed for me by things that I've seen on Twitter and social media, is that where there have been examples of social distancing measures breaking down in supermarkets, it's usually when it's been raining. I'm not being, it's because people don't want to queue outside of the supermarkets, and actually they sort of huddle in, and the supermarkets say, okay, you can all come in because it's absolutely pouring down outside. So again, you know, for visitor attractions, it always comes down to weather, toilets, behavior, and provision of good facilities, including cafes. So one of the things that people might want to think about if they're an outdoor attraction, or indeed an indoor attraction with outdoor queues, is the effect that weather can have in disrupting managed social distancing behaviors.
Yeah. Yes, all I can do is agree with that, to be honest. Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to say the other thing about, just coming back to your point about staff making people feel more comfortable. I've always said the biggest barrier to coming to places like museums, galleries, heritage attractions is people feeling like they want to belong. And I think that's even more the case now, is that they'll be wanting to be made to feel welcome and feel like they belong in these places. And staff have an absolutely critical role to play in that, more so now than ever.
I think that's absolutely right, and you know, again, one of the things that you identify very clearly is that, you know, how should attractions behave when we reopen, and what are people expecting our behaviour to be? And the number one was a safe environment, and number two, a warm welcome. 3, flexibility about bringing your own food or whatever. And the 4th, and this is a word that's never come up in this kind of sentiment research ever, is patience. So that whole changed nature of the way in which front of house staff interact with people. They've always been patient, they've always been energetic, they've always been engaged, they've always given a warm welcome. But these now are so important to get right from day one, because people, as you've identified, are waiting to see whether attractions get that behavior right on day one, and that will inform their decision as to whether they come back in week 1, week 2, month 2, month 3. I'm really conscious of time. It's about 6 minutes past 11, so we've gone the full hour. But that was so incredibly helpful. That was incredibly comprehensive, really detailed. As I said to everybody, if you receive our daily evening bulletins, you will have just received the whole deck of this PowerPoint presentation. If you don't, you will have got the link to this through somehow. So go back to either contacting us and see if you can get to be on our daily bulletin if you're a member of Alva. We're also recording this as well, so we'll put the link to the recording in our daily bulletin either this evening or possibly tomorrow as well. And then Steve, as he's just indicated, will be continuing this research with possibly, certainly 2, 3, possibly a 4th wave of sentiment research to see how the public are reacting as we approach opening, when we open, and to react to see how the behaviours have changed by visitor attractions when we've been open for a couple of weeks or so. So this will be the first one of these on this particular topic, informed by primary research. So again, my thanks to Steve. That was a fantastic piece of work, really clearly expressed. I'm really grateful to you. Thank you very much to Andy Povey from Gateway Ticketing and his colleagues who facilitated this webinar. If you're an Alva fan, you'll probably know that we've got another webinar in 50 minutes. It's on retail in a time of social distancing. We've got a great lineup of speakers, including the Customer Experience Director at John Lewis Partnerships, that's John Lewis and Waitrose, Sarah Roots, who's the Executive Vice President Global for Warner Brothers Studio Tours, Joe Prosser, who's the Director Commercial at the Royal Academy, and Richard Sweet, who's Director of Enterprise at the Museum of London. So they're coming on board in the next webinar, which starts at 12 noon. Next week's webinar will be all about marketing at a time of lockdown. So our partners, Digital Visitor, will be introducing a number of case studies about who's doing what, how, to whom, and when. And that will be 12 noon to 1 o'clock next Thursday. Thanks very much for tuning in. Please send us your feedback and your comments, and I hope you found today useful, and the research that we commissioned from Steve Mills and Decision House to be really helpful to your ongoing work. Thanks very much and goodbye.